The wine glass sat untouched before me, its burgundy contents catching the warm glow of the crystal chandelier overhead. I couldn't drink it, hadn't been able to for 6 months now, but removing it felt like announcing something I wasn't ready to share with a room full of strangers. The Belmont Hotel's grand ballroom hummed with the particular energy of wealth, the kind of space where conversations about quarterly earnings and summer homes in the Hamptons floated as easily as the champagne being poured by white-gloved servers. I didn't belong here. The emerald dress I'd borrowed from my friend Maya pulled tight across my midsection, a fact I'd tried to disguise with strategic draping and the careful positioning of my clutch. 6 months pregnant, and every hour in this ornate chair felt like an endurance test. My lower back throbbed with that deep, persistent ache that had become my constant companion, the kind that made even breathing feel like work. I shifted again, the velvet cushion offering no relief, and tried to focus on why I was here at all. "Just network, Alara," my editor had said, practically begging. "The Belmont Foundation Gala, one night. These are the people who fund investigations. Who knows, maybe you'll find your next big story." What I'd found, instead, was a reminder of how far I'd fallen since the divorce. Freelance investigative journalism paid enough to cover rent if I didn't eat much. The pregnancy had slowed everything. My pace, my ambition, my ability to chase leads through the city at odd hours. The technical translation work I'd picked up on the side helped, but barely. I was treading water in a pool that kept getting deeper, and nights like this, surrounded by people who spent more on a single fundraiser ticket than I made in a month, only emphasized how close I was to drowning. I reached for the water glass instead, my fingers trembling slightly. The ice had melted an hour ago. That's when I saw him. Sebastian Morrow moved through the crowd like he owned it, which, given his family's holdings in commercial real estate, wasn't far from the truth. My ex-husband still carried himself with that same entitled confidence, the walk of a man who'd never been told no and wouldn't have listened if he had been. His arm was draped around a woman who looked like she'd been assembled rather than born, all sharp angles and expensive cosmetic work, wrapped in a dress that cost more than my car. He saw me immediately. Sebastian always did. I watched his eyes travel across the room, land on me, widen with recognition, then narrow with something uglier. He said something to his companion, squeezed her waist, and began walking toward my table. My heart kicked against my ribs. "Don't come over here," I whispered to no one. "Please don't come over here." But Sebastian Morrow had never been good at reading rooms or caring about other people's comfort. "Alara," he arrived at the table with that smile I used to mistake for charm. What a surprise. I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Sebastian." "I almost didn't recognize you." His gaze dropped pointedly to my stomach, then back to my face. "You've changed." The man seated beside me, someone I'd exchanged maybe 3 sentences with since the dinner began, stilled. I felt rather than saw his attention shift entirely to our interaction. "It's good to see you too," I managed, trying to keep my voice level. Sebastian laughed, that sharp bark that used to make me flinch during our marriage. "Is it though? I mean, look at yourself, Alara." He gestured vaguely at my body. "You really let yourself go after the divorce. I knew you would, but this is..." The table went silent. Not just our immediate vicinity, the spreading kind of quiet that happens when people sense conflict and can't help but tune in. Heat flooded my face. My hands found my lap, fingers knotting together. "I'm doing fine," I said quietly. "Fine." Sebastian leaned closer, and I caught the whiskey on his breath. "You look disgusting now. Seriously. Did you give up completely, or is this just stress eating? Because I remember how you used to obsess over every calorie, and now..." "That's enough." The voice came from beside me, low, calm, and absolutely certain. Sebastian straightened, his smile faltering. "Excuse me." The man who'd been sitting quietly throughout dinner stood. He moved without urgency, simply rose from his chair and adjusted his cufflinks with the kind of deliberate precision that suggested he did everything intentionally. He was tall, taller than Sebastian, with dark hair touched with silver at the temples and eyes that held the sort of cold assessment usually reserved for business acquisitions. I said that's enough. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. You will apologize to the lady, then you will return to your table. Sebastian's face flushed. And who the hell do you think you are? The man didn't answer. He simply looked at Sebastian the way you might look at a particularly disappointing quarterly report, then glanced toward the back of the room. Two men in dark suits appeared almost instantly, moving with the quiet efficiency of people paid very well to handle problems discreetly. The energy in the room shifted. Even I felt it, the sudden recognition that Sebastian had miscalculated badly. I don't have to take this, Sebastian muttered, but he was already backing away, his bravado cracking. No, the man beside me agreed. You don't. Sebastian left. His date followed, tottering on her heels. Conversations gradually resumed around us, though I caught several curious glances still directed at our table. I couldn't breathe properly. My hands were shaking so hard I had to press them against my thighs to stop the trembling. Shame and relief and confusion warred in my chest, each emotion fighting for dominance. The man sat back down, his movements unhurried. He caught the attention of a server and ordered something I didn't hear, then turned to me. Water, he said simply when the server brought a fresh glass, ice still crackling in the crystal. He pushed it toward me. Take your time. I stared at him. At this stranger who just dismantled my ex-husband's cruelty with nothing more than his presence. I'm Luca, he said quietly, and you're safe here. I didn't know what to say to him. Luca, just Luca, no last name offered, sat beside me with the kind of stillness that suggested he was comfortable with silence. The water he'd ordered sat between us, condensation already beating on the crystal. I reached for it because my hands needed something to do, something to anchor me before I fell apart completely in front of a room full of people who just witnessed my public humiliation. Thank you, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. You didn't have to do that. Yes, he said simply, I did. There was no grandstanding in the words, no masculine posturing or expectation of gratitude. He stated it as fact, the way someone might observe that rain was wet or fire was hot. Of course he had intervened. What else would a decent person have done? I took a sip of water, then another. The ice helped, the cold shocking my system back into something resembling composure. Around us, the gala continued its careful dance, conversations resumed, laughter bubbled up from nearby tables, the string quartet in the corner played something baroque and forgettable. But I could still feel eyes on us, curiosity burning through the practiced indifference of the wealthy. I'm sorry, I said, setting the glass down. I shouldn't have brought my personal drama to. You brought nothing. Luca's interruption was gentle but firm. He did. The distinction mattered, I realized. He wasn't letting me shoulder blame that wasn't mine to carry. It was such a small thing, but after months, years, really, of Sebastian twisting every conflict into evidence of my inadequacy, the clarity of it nearly undid me. I blinked hard against the pressure building behind my eyes. Not here, not now. Luca seemed to sense my fragility. He shifted the conversation with the ease of someone accustomed to reading rooms and people. You're a journalist. I looked at him surprised. How did you? Your editor mentioned it during the cocktail hour. She was quite enthusiastic about your investigative work. A hint of something that might have been amusement touched the corner of his mouth. She also mentioned you were reluctant to attend tonight. Maya has no filter when she's networking. I found myself almost smiling despite everything. But yes, freelance mostly. I write about pharmaceutical fraud, medical device recalls, the kind of stories that make lawyers nervous. Important work. Work that pays terribly, I said before I could stop myself. The admission hung between us, too honest for a conversation with a stranger at a charity gala. I felt heat creep up my neck. Most important work does. Luca's tone held no judgment. The things worth doing rarely come with adequate compensation. We lapsed into silence again. I became aware of the weight of my body, the persistent ache in my spine, the way my borrowed dress pulled across my stomach. Luca's intervention had stopped Sebastian's cruelty, but it couldn't erase what had been said. You look disgusting now." The words echoed in my head, mixing with 1,000 other small cruelties from our marriage. "I should go," I said abruptly. The walls felt too close, the chandelier too bright. "Thank you again, really, but I—" "Of course." Luca stood when I did, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that startled me. When was the last time someone had done that? "May I walk you out?" I wanted to say no, wanted to flee alone, to process this mess without an audience. But something in his steady gaze made me nod instead. We moved through the ballroom together, Luca's presence somehow carving a path through the crowd without him appearing to do anything at all. People simply moved aside, conversations pausing as we passed. I caught fragments, whispered speculation, curious glances. My skin prickled with awareness. Who was this man who could command a room without speaking? The hotel lobby was quieter, all marble floors and low lighting. The cool air from the rotating doors felt like salvation against my flushed skin. I'd planned to call a rideshare, to disappear into the anonymous comfort of someone else's backseat, but Luca stopped me with a gentle gesture. One moment, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a business card. Heavy stock, minimalist design, just a name, Luca Valenroth, and a phone number. "If you need anything." I took the card, my fingers brushing his briefly. "I don't understand, you don't even know me." "No," he agreed, "but I know men like him, and I know that men like him don't stop after one public confrontation." His eyes held mine, serious and somehow sad. "If he tries to contact you if there are problems, any problems, call that number, anytime, for any reason." The specificity of his words sent a chill through me. "You think he'll come back?" "I think men who need to humiliate women in public are rarely finished after a single performance." Luca's voice remained calm, but something harder edged the words. "I hope I'm wrong." I wanted to argue, to insist that Sebastian had moved on, that the divorce was final, and he had his sculpted girlfriend and a life that didn't include me. But the card in my hand felt heavier than it should, weighted with a truth I didn't want to acknowledge. "Thank you," I whispered. Luca inclined his head slightly. "Get home safely, Alara." He knew my name. I hadn't told him my name. But then he was gone, moving back toward the ballroom with that same unhurried grace, and I was alone in the lobby with a business card and more questions than answers. The apartment was dark when I got home, my neighbor's television providing the only light in the hallway. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs slowly, one hand on the railing, the other pressed to my lower back. The baby shifted inside me, a rolling movement that felt like reassurance and accusation all at once. "I'm sorry," I murmured, unlocking my door. "You shouldn't have heard that, any of that." Inside, I dropped my clutch on the kitchen counter and sank onto the couch without bothering to turn on lights. The emerald dress would need to be returned to Maya tomorrow. The borrowed heels had already been kicked into a corner. I pulled my knees up as far as my stomach would allow and let my head fall back against the cushions. Had I imagined how bad it was? The cruelty in Sebastian's voice, the public nature of his mockery. Maybe I was being oversensitive, hormonal. Pregnancy made everything feel more intense, more raw, maybe. No. I pressed my hands against my face, breathing hard. That was his voice in my head, the gaslighting that had characterized our entire marriage. "You're overreacting. You're too emotional. You're making a scene." But Luca had heard it too, had seen it, had stopped it. I pulled out my phone, intending to text Maya that I was home safe, but the screen showed a notification I'd somehow missed during the gala. An email, received 2 hours ago. The subject line made my blood run cold. "Ray, divorce settlement action required." My hands shook as I opened it. Legal letterhead. Sebastian's attorney. Words that blurred together but whose meaning was crystal clear. Contesting the settlement, demanding financial disclosures, requesting paternity verification, claiming rights to. The phone slipped from my fingers. No. The baby kicked again, harder this time. I pressed both hands to my stomach, tears finally breaking free. "He can't," I whispered to the darkness, to the life growing inside me, to whatever God might be listening. He signed the papers, it's over. He can't. But the email sat there on my dropped phone, glowing in the darkness. Sebastian Moro wasn't finished with me after all. And this time, humiliation was just the beginning. The letter arrived 3 days later. Not an email this time, but actual paper, thick, expensive stock delivered by courier to my apartment door. I signed for it with shaking hands, already knowing what it would say, already feeling the walls closing in. Moro v. Voss, petition for emergency custody determination and paternity testing. I read it once standing in my doorway, then again sitting at my kitchen table, then a third time curled on my couch, the words blurring as panic narrowed my vision to a single, terrible point. Sebastian was claiming the baby was his. Never mind that we'd been divorced for over a year. Never mind that the timeline made it mathematically impossible. We'd been separated for 14 months, and I was only 6 months pregnant. Never mind that he'd made his hatred of children abundantly clear throughout our marriage, calling them life ruiners and financial black holes. None of that mattered to his attorney. What mattered, according to the 8 pages of legal documentation spread across my coffee table, was that Sebastian Moro had reasonable cause to believe the child might be his, that he had parental rights that must be protected, that he was entitled to court-ordered DNA testing, immediate custody arrangements, and full financial disclosure of my assets and income. The last part would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. I had no assets. My income barely qualified as income. But Sebastian knew that. This wasn't about the baby, a child he'd never wanted and couldn't possibly believe was his. This was about control, about reminding me that even divorced, even pregnant with another man's child, I couldn't escape him. He could reach into my life whenever he wanted and tear it apart. Just because he could. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Think carefully before you ignore this. My client is prepared to pursue full custody if necessary. We can make this easy or difficult. Your choice. The baby kicked, a rolling movement that felt like fear mirroring my own. I'm sorry, I whispered, pressing both hands to my stomach. I'm so sorry, I thought we were safe, I thought. My voice cracked. The tears I'd been holding back for 3 days finally broke through, violent and consuming. I sobbed into my hands, my body shaking with the force of it. How was I supposed to fight this? I couldn't afford an attorney, could barely afford groceries. The freelance work had dried up in the past month. Morning sickness and fatigue had made me miss deadlines, and clients didn't wait around for unreliable writers. Sebastian knew all of this. He'd probably counted on it. Another text arrived. Clock is ticking, Alara. I looked at the letter again, at the demand for paternity testing, at the threat of custody proceedings, at my ex-husband's willingness to weaponize the legal system simply because I dared to leave him, dared to move on, dared to exist in a space he couldn't control. We're not doing this, I told my unborn child, my voice steadier now. We're not letting him win. But I had no idea how to stop him. My eyes fell on the business card I'd left on the kitchen counter 3 days ago. Heavy stock, minimalist design, Luca Valenroth, a phone number underneath. Anytime, for any reason. I stared at the card for 20 minutes. This wasn't his problem. He was a stranger who'd intervened once out of basic human decency, and I'd already imposed enough on his kindness. Calling him now, asking for help with something this serious, this legally complicated, felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But what choice did I have? My fingers trembled as I dialed the number. It rang once, twice. Alara, his voice was calm, unsurprised, as though he'd been expecting my call. Are you safe? The question undid me. Not what do you need or why are you calling, but are you safe? As though my well-being was the only thing that mattered. My voice broke. I tried again. I need help. Sebastian, there's a letter. He's claiming the baby is his and he wants custody and I can't. I don't have money for lawyers, I don't. I'm coming, Luca said simply. Text me your address, lock your door, I'll be there in 20 minutes. You don't have to. 18 minutes now. Send the address, Alara. The line went dead. I texted him my address with shaking fingers, then did what he'd said, locked my door, checked the lock twice, and waited. He arrived in 15 minutes. Luca Valenroth looked different outside the context of the Belmont Hotel gala. Still impeccably dressed in a dark suit, but somehow more real in my modest apartment hallway. Taller than I remembered, more present. He stepped inside without waiting for invitation, his eyes scanning the space, not judging, I realized, but assessing, making sure I was actually safe. "Show me," he said quietly. I handed him the letter, watched as he read it once, his expression unchanging. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Catherine, I need you." A pause. "No, now, I'm sending you an address and documentation." Another pause, and something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "Yes, I know it's Saturday, bill me triple." He ended the call and looked at me. "My attorney will be here in 30 minutes. I can't afford." "You're not paying." Luca's tone left no room for argument. He photographed each page of Sebastian's letter with precise efficiency, then forwarded them somewhere. "This is harassment. It ends today." I sank onto the couch, suddenly dizzy. "I don't understand. Why are you doing this?" Luca sat across from me, maintaining careful distance. "Because men like Sebastian Morrow use money and legal systems as weapons against people who can't fight back. Because you shouldn't have to face this alone. Because," he paused, something complicated crossing his expression, "because it's the right thing to do." "I can't accept charity," I said, my voice small but firm. "I won't." "Good," Luca leaned forward slightly. "Then don't, I have a proposition." Catherine Sterling arrived exactly 30 minutes later, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who radiated competence and carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my rent. She read Sebastian's letter, asked me 3 questions, and made 4 phone calls that left me lightheaded. "Cease and desist by Monday," she told Luca, ignoring me entirely. "Formal complaint to the Bar Association Tuesday. If he persists, we'll pursue harassment charges. This won't make it to court." "Good," Luca turned to me. "Catherine handles all my legal affairs. She's the best in the city. She'll make this go away." The relief was so intense I felt nauseous. "Thank you. I don't know how to." "There is something you can do," Luca said, "if you're interested." Catherine excused herself with the efficiency of someone used to reading rooms. Suddenly it was just Luca and me in my tiny living room, the weight of his offer hanging between us. "I run a foundation," he said. "The Valenroth Foundation. We fund investigative journalism, medical research transparency, pharmaceutical accountability." He paused, letting me absorb the implications. "We need someone who understands how to chase stories that make corporations nervous, someone with your particular skills." "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering you independence." The distinction clearly mattered to him. "You work, you earn, you maintain your dignity. My legal team handles Sebastian as part of your employment security, not charity, but practical business protection." His eyes held mine. "This only works if you actually want the job, if you're good at it." "I am good at it," I said, some of my old confidence returning. "I know," a hint of a smile. "I've read your work, the piece on falsified drug trial data, exceptional." He'd looked me up, actually researched my writing. The realization sent something warm through my chest. "What's the salary?" I needed to know this was real, not pity disguised as employment. He named a figure that made me blink. It wasn't extravagant by his standards, probably, but it was more than I'd made in the best year of my freelance career. Enough to cover rent, medical bills, and actually save something. Enough to be truly free of Sebastian. "I can start Monday," I said. "Take a week, get settled. Catherine will handle your legal situation." Luca stood, preparing to leave. "Welcome to the foundation, Alara." He was at the door when I stopped him. "Why?" I asked. "Really, why?" Luca turned back. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked uncertain, vulnerable. "Because I know what it's like to watch someone use power as a weapon," he said quietly. "And I decided a long time ago that when I had power, I'd use it differently." Then he was gone, And I was alone in my apartment with a job offer that felt like salvation and a business card I'd probably never stop carrying. My phone buzzed one last time. An email from Sebastian's attorney. My client wishes to withdraw his petition. Apologies for any confusion. Sebastian's threats hadn't just begun to crumble. They'd been obliterated. And somewhere in the past hour, without my quite realizing it, protection had transformed into something more complicated. Partnership. The Valenroth Foundation occupied the entire 15th floor of a glass tower overlooking the river. My first morning, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows and watched sunlight fracture across the water, turning it into something molten and alive. It was the kind of view people paid millions for. The kind of view I'd never imagined having access to. Coffee or tea? I turned to find Luca holding 2 mugs, his expression gently amused. Or do you prefer herbal something? Decaf tea, I admitted, taking the mug he offered. The pregnancy books are very firm about caffeine limits. I know. At my surprised look, he added, Marion, my sister, went through this twice. I learned more about gestational nutrition than I ever expected to. We stood together at the window, drinking our respective beverages in comfortable silence. This had become our routine over the past 6 weeks. I'd arrive at 8, find Luca already working, and we'd share these quiet morning moments before the day officially began. Sometimes we talked. Often we didn't. The silence never felt empty. Your office is ready, Luca said eventually. Corner space, adjustable desk, the ergonomic chair you requested. It set up your systems yesterday. You didn't have to give me a corner office. I gave you the office best suited to your needs. He glanced at my expanding midsection with a careful respect that somehow never felt invasive. You'll be spending long hours here. You should be comfortable. That was Luca in essence, practical kindness delivered without fanfare. He'd arranged my workspace for maximum comfort, ensured the office kitchen was stocked with the specific crackers that helped my morning nausea, and somehow always knew when I needed to take a break before I'd admitted it to myself. But he never touched me, never crossed the careful professional distance he'd established. Sometimes I wished he would. My office became my sanctuary. Large windows, natural light, and enough space to spread out the research that consumed my days. The Foundation's mission aligned perfectly with my investigative instincts. I spent mornings tracking pharmaceutical company compliance violations and afternoons interviewing whistleblowers about medical device failures. It was meaningful work, important work, and for the first time in years, I was being paid what I was worth. Luca checked in twice a day, once mid-morning, once before he left in the evening. Never intrusive, always attentive. How's the respiratory device investigation? He asked one afternoon, appearing in my doorway with a container from the Thai place I'd mentioned liking. Damning, I accepted the food gratefully. 3 deaths that should have triggered recalls. The company buried the reports. Do you have enough for publication? Almost. I need one more source willing to go on record. I paused, then added, Thank you, for lunch, you didn't have to. You haven't eaten since breakfast. He said it matter-of-factly, the way he said most things. The baby needs nutrition even when you forget. My hand moved unconsciously to my stomach, where the baby, nearly 7 months along now, kicked with increasing frequency. How do you know I haven't eaten? Because I pay attention. His eyes held mine for a moment longer than necessary, something unspoken passing between us. Then he stepped back. Eat, then take a walk. The circulation helps. He was gone before I could respond, leaving me with Thai food and a heart that beat slightly faster than it should. He's in love with you. I nearly dropped my water bottle. Marion Valenroth sat across from me in the office cafe, her eyes dancing with amusement. I'd met Luca's sister twice before, a warm, perceptive woman in her early 40s who ran the Foundation's grant programs. He's not, we're just colleagues, I stammered. Darling, Marion's smile was knowing. I've known my brother for 43 years. I've seen him through relationships, business partnerships, every kind of professional and personal entanglement. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Heat flooded my face. You're misreading the situation. Am I? She leaned forward conspiratorially. Did he tell you he restructured the entire foundation hearing process after meeting you, created a new position that didn't exist before, personally interviewed your references, something he's never done for any other hire? He was just being thorough. He was being obsessed. Marian's tone was affectionate, not critical. Luca doesn't do anything by half measures. When he cares about something or someone, he commits completely. She paused, her expression softening. He's terrified of overstepping, of using his position to pressure you, so he maintains that careful distance, even though anyone with eyes can see it costs him. I pressed my hands to my burning cheeks. I can't. The baby and the job and everything with Sebastian just ended. I can't complicate this. I'm not suggesting you should. Marian stood, gathering her things. I'm just saying my brother is one of the good ones, and good ones don't come along often. She squeezed my shoulder gently. Think about it. Catherine Sterling called on a Friday afternoon with news I'd been half expecting, half dreading. Sebastian Morrow has withdrawn completely, she said, satisfaction evident in her voice. No custody claims, no paternity demands, no contact attempts. His attorney sent formal documentation. It's over. Over, I repeated, testing the word. Over, he can't come near you legally without violating multiple court orders. If he tries, we bury him. A pause. You're safe, Ms. Voss, finally. I thanked her and ended the call, then sat very still in my office chair. Safe. The word felt foreign. I'd spent so long looking over my shoulder, anticipating Sebastian's next move, that the absence of threat felt almost disorienting. That night, I slept through until morning for the first time in months. The awareness between Luca and me grew like a living thing. I'd catch him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, his gaze soft with something that made my breath catch. He'd touch my shoulder briefly when saying goodbye, his hand lingering a half-second too long. We'd reach for the same document, and our fingers would brush, electricity arcing between us. Neither of us acknowledged it. I told myself it was gratitude I felt, relief at being protected, employed, secure. Not the way my heart jumped when I heard his voice. Not the way I'd started choosing my clothes more carefully in the mornings. Not the way I imagined what it would feel like if he ever crossed that careful distance he maintained. Luca, for his part, remained professionally attentive. But I'd begun to recognize the signs, the tightness around his eyes when someone mentioned relationships, the way he'd leave the room if conversation turned too personal. The careful control he exercised over every interaction. He wanted me. I knew it with the same certainty I knew my own name. And I wanted him. But the space between wanting and having felt insurmountable. He was my employer, my protector, the man who'd saved me from Sebastian's cruelty. How could we navigate anything more without risking everything we'd built? So we existed in careful tension, orbiting each other with increasing gravity, both terrified of collision. It happened on a Tuesday evening. I was working late on the respiratory device investigation, so focused on cross-referencing medical records that I didn't notice the pain at first. Just a dull ache in my lower back, familiar enough after 7 months of pregnancy. Then it sharpened. I gasped, one hand flying to my stomach. The baby had been unusually quiet all day, a detail I'd noted but not worried about. Now fear spiked through me. Another contraction, harder this time. Too early, 7.5 months, not ready. My phone was across the desk. I reached for it with shaking hands, knocked over my water bottle, barely noticed. The pain was building, tightening around my abdomen like a vice. I pulled up my contacts, scrolled past my doctor, after hours wouldn't answer, past Maya out of town this week. My thumb hovered over the emergency services number. Then I called Luca instead. He answered on the first ring. Ilara. Something's wrong, I managed. The baby, it hurts, I think. I'm coming. His voice was absolutely calm, the kind of calm that cut through panic. Stay on the line with me. Are you in your office? Yes. Good. Unlock the door if you can. I'm 3 minutes away. How are you? I was working late. 2 minutes now. Breathe, Alara, in through your nose, out through your mouth. I followed his instructions, pain cresting and falling. Felt wetness between my legs and looked down to see my chair was soaking. Luca, I whispered, my water just broke. A pause, then, I'm here, don't move. The office door burst open. Luca crossed the space in 3 strides, taking in the situation with a single glance. He crouched beside my chair, his hands gentle on my shoulders. We're going to the hospital, he said quietly. Right now, can you stand? I nodded, but when I tried to rise, another contraction hit. I cried out, doubling over. Luca caught me. Without hesitation, he lifted me into his arms like I weighed nothing, cradling me against his chest. I've got you, he murmured. I've got you, Alara, you're safe. And for the first time since feeling that first contraction, I believed it. But everything had become urgent. The baby was coming. And nothing would ever be the same. The hospital blurred into fragments, fluorescent lights streaking overhead, voices calling instructions, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, and through it all, Luca's hand wrapped around mine. You're doing beautifully, he murmured, his thumb tracing circles on my knuckles. Breathe through it, that's it. Another contraction seized me, pain radiating from my core outward. I gripped his hand hard enough to hurt, but he didn't flinch. Just kept talking in that low, steady voice, grounding me when panic threatened to pull me under. 7.5 months, I gasped when the contraction passed. Too early, the baby. The doctors are monitoring everything, Luca said firmly. The baby's heartbeat is strong. You're both going to be fine. I wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. But premature labor hadn't been part of any plan, and control was slipping through my fingers with each passing minute. The obstetrician, Dr. Chen, who'd been pulled from dinner by emergency page, examined me with efficient compassion. You're progressing quickly, she said. We're looking at active labor. Baby's in a good position, but we'll have the NICU team standing by as a precaution. NICU, I repeated, fear clawing at my throat. Standard protocol for early delivery, Dr. Chen assured me. Your baby's size and development look good on the ultrasound. We're being cautious, not reactive. Luca's hand tightened on mine. When Dr. Chen left to scrub in, he shifted closer, his free hand brushing hair back from my sweat-dampened forehead. I'm scared, I whispered. I know. His eyes held mine, gray and steady and absolutely cert. But you're not alone. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Labor progressed with terrifying speed. Somewhere around hour 3, I stopped being able to form coherent sentences. Pain consumed everything, each contraction building on the last until I couldn't remember what it felt like to not hurt. The epidural helped, but this was still an overwhelming, primal experience that reduced me to pure instinct. Through it all, Luca stayed. He learned my breathing patterns, anticipated contractions before I felt them coming, adjusted pillows and offered ice chips and murmured encouragement in 3 languages, English, German, and something that might have been Italian. When I cried, he didn't tell me to stop. When I swore at him during a particularly brutal contraction, he smiled and said, I've heard worse in board meetings. Your hand, I gasped, noticing the white marks my grip had left on his skin. I'm hurting you. You're not. He adjusted his position so I could hold him more comfortably. I promise, Alara, you're not hurting me. At hour 5, Dr. Chen returned with the declaration I'd been simultaneously dreading and desperate for. It's time to push. The birth itself existed outside of time. Pain and pressure and Luca's voice cutting through both, telling me I was strong, I was doing it, almost there, just a little more. The delivery room had filled with people, nurses, a pediatrician, the NICU team standing ready, but I only saw Luca. His face had gone pale, all that careful composure cracking as he witnessed what I was going through. Tears tracked down his cheeks, though I don't think he noticed. One more push, Dr. Chen coached. Big one, Alara, you can do this. I bore down with everything I had left, Luca's hand in mine. his voice in my ear. And then a cry. Small, furious, absolutely perfect. "It's a boy," Dr. Chen announced, lifting a tiny, wriggling creature into view. "He's breathing well, good color." The pediatrician took him immediately, assessing with quick expertise while I tried to see around the medical team blocking my view. A boy. I had a son. The reality felt too enormous to hold. "Ilara," Luca's voice was wrecked, raw with emotion. "Look." The pediatrician appeared at my bedside, placing a small bundle against my chest. I looked down into the face of my son, red and wrinkled and impossibly tiny, and felt my entire world reorganize around this single point. "Hello," I whispered, touching his impossibly small hand. His fingers wrapped around mine instantly, grip surprisingly strong. "Hello, little one, I'm your mama." He was beautiful. He was perfect. He was 5 weeks early and barely 5 pounds, but his lungs worked and his heart beat, and when I looked at him, I understood for the first time what people meant when they talked about love that transcended reason. I glanced up at Luca through tears. He was staring at my son with an expression of such naked wonder, such unguarded emotion, that it stole my breath. His hand came up, hesitant, hovering near the baby without quite touching. "Go ahead," I said softly. Luca's finger brushed my son's cheek with impossible gentleness. The baby turned toward the touch, mouth working. And Luca completely broke. He pressed his free hand to his mouth, shoulders shaking, tears flowing openly. All the composure he'd maintained through labor, through delivery, through everything, it crumbled in the face of this tiny life. "I'm sorry," he managed. I can't." "Don't apologize," I said, my own tears falling faster. "Please don't apologize for feeling." The pediatrician gently reclaimed my son for assessment, promising he'd be back soon. The NICU team conferred, determined he needed monitoring but looked stable. Dr. Chen stitched and checked and eventually declared me ready to move to recovery. Through it all, Luca stayed. The recovery room was quiet, dimly lit, peaceful after the chaos of delivery. My son, still unnamed, that realization hitting me with surprise, slept in a bassinet beside my bed, monitors tracking his tiny heartbeat and breathing. The pediatrician had been cautiously optimistic. His lungs were developed enough. His weight was low but manageable. Barring complications, we might only need a few days of hospital observation rather than weeks in the NICU. I couldn't stop looking at him. This impossibly small person I'd carried for 7.5 months, worried over, protected from Sebastian's cruelty. He was real now, separate from me, his own person. "Have you thought about names?" Luca asked quietly. He sat in the chair beside my bed, closer than professional distance required, his earlier composure only partially restored. "Not really," I admitted. I kept telling myself I had time. "You have time now." His eyes moved to the bassinet, that same wonder softening his expression. "He's perfect, Ilara." "He is." I paused, gathering courage for what needed to be said. "Thank you for staying, for everything. You didn't have to." "Yes," Luca interrupted gently. "I did." We'd had this exchange before, in the aftermath of Sebastian's humiliation at the gala. But it meant something different now, heavier, more significant. Luca stood, moving to the window. Dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. He stood silhouetted against it, hands in his pockets. Shoulders tense, with something he was trying to control. "I need to tell you something," he said finally, his voice carefully measured. "And I need you to know there's absolutely no pressure, no expectations. Your job is secure regardless. Nothing changes unless you want it to." My heart began to race. "Luca, I'm in love with you." He turned to face me, his expression open and vulnerable in a way I'd never seen. "I have been since the night at the gala. Maybe before, I read your work months ago before we met, and I was already half in love with your mind, your courage, your refusal to let injustice stand." I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Luca continued, words spilling out like he'd been holding them back too long. "I know the timing is terrible. I know you just went through labor, that you're exhausted and overwhelmed and processing becoming a mother. I know I'm your employer and that creates complicated power dynamics. I know," he broke off, running a hand through his hair. "I know this is possibly the worst time to say any of this." "Then why are you saying it?" I whispered. "Because I watched you give birth to that beautiful boy, and I realized I want to be part of his life, part of both your lives, not as an employer or a protector or someone doing the right thing." His eyes held mine, fierce and tender all at once. "As a father, as a partner, as someone who loves you both with everything I have." Tears spilled down my cheeks. "Luca." "You don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "Take all the time you need. Focus on your son, on recovery, on figuring out motherhood. I'll still be here, whether as your employer, your friend, or, if you'll have me, something more." I thought about the past 2 months, about Luca's steady presence, his quiet care, the way he'd made me feel safe for the first time in years, about how he'd held my hand through labor, cried at my son's birth, looked at this tiny life with such immediate, unconditional love. I thought about Sebastian, who'd called me disgusting for carrying life, who'd tried to use power as a weapon to control through cruelty. And I thought about Luca, who used his power to protect, who gave rather than taking, who offered partnership, not possession. "Come here," I said softly. Luca crossed to my bedside, sitting carefully on the edge of the mattress. I reached for his hand, the one that had held mine through contractions, that had brushed my son's cheek with such gentleness. "I love you too," I said, watching his eyes widen. "I think I have for weeks. I was just too scared to admit it, too worried about complicating things, about whether it was real or just gratitude." I squeezed his hand. "But watching you tonight, the way you stayed, the way you looked at him, I know it's real." "Ilara." "I don't need time," I interrupted gently. "I need you. We need you. Not because you saved me from Sebastian or because you gave me a job, but because you're kind and steady and the first person I think to call when something goes wrong. Because you make me feel safe and seen and valued. Because," my voice cracked, "because I want you to be his father." Luca's face crumpled. He pressed my hand to his lips, shoulders shaking with the force of his emotion. "I'll spend every day earning that," he whispered against my skin. "I promise." I tugged him closer until our foreheads touched. "You already have." We stayed like that, breathing each other's air, until a small sound from the bassinet drew our attention. My son was waking, mouth working, face scrunching toward a cry. "May I?" Luca asked. I nodded, throat tight with emotion. Luca lifted my son with a surety that surprised me, cradling him against his chest with one large hand supporting the impossibly tiny head. He swayed gently, murmuring in German, something that sounded like a lullaby. My son settled immediately, nuzzling against Luca's shoulder. And watching them together, this man I loved and this child I'd created, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. Not fear, not shame, not the constant vigilance that had characterized so much of my life. Peace. 6 weeks later. The apartment Luca had found for us, insisted on, really, claiming the foundation covered housing for senior staff, overlooked the same river visible from my office. Morning light streamed through the windows as I walked the hardwood floors, bouncing gently with Elias sleeping against my shoulder. We'd named him after Luca's grandfather, a choice that had made Luca cry again. He cried easily now, all that careful composure permanently altered by fatherhood. I loved him more for it. "How is he?" Luca emerged from the kitchen with coffee for himself and tea for me, still in pajama pants and a t-shirt. He worked from home more now, rearranging his entire schedule around our family. Our family, the phrase still sent wonder through me. "Finally sleeping," I murmured, accepting the tea. "After eating every 2 hours all night." Luca set down his coffee and gently lifted Elias from my arms. "Go shower, rest, I have him." I watched them for a moment, Luca swaying in the morning light, whispering to our son in that low voice, Elias' tiny fist curled against his father's chest. 6 weeks ago, I'd been terrified and alone. Now I had this. In the shower, Letting hot water ease my exhausted muscles, I thought about Sebastian. About that night at the gala when he'd called me disgusting, when he'd tried to shame me for carrying life. He'd been so certain I was diminished, lessened, brought low by pregnancy and divorce and financial struggle. But he'd been blind to the truth. I wasn't broken that night. I was carrying a legacy, not just the child in my womb, but the strength to survive his cruelty, to build something new, to choose differently. I'd been becoming powerful. And now, stepping out of the shower to the sound of Luca singing a German lullaby to our son, I understood the final truth Sebastian would never grasp. Real power wasn't control or domination, or the ability to make others small. Real power was love, was choosing, was building a family not from obligation but from fierce, intentional commitment. I wrapped myself in a robe and padded back to the living room. Luca looked up from where he sat with Elias, his smile softening into something tender and domestic and absolutely perfect. "Come here," he said quietly. I crossed to them, settling against his side. His arm came around me, pulling me close. Elias slept on, oblivious to the moment, to the family forming around him. "I love you," Luca murmured against my hair. "I love you too," I whispered back. And in the morning light, in this space we'd chosen, this family we'd built, I was finally completely home. Not because someone had saved me, but because I'd saved myself. And found someone strong enough to stand beside me while I did. If you enjoyed Alara and Luca's journey from shame to strength, please subscribe to our channel for more emotional, dramatic stories that will keep you hooked from beginning to end. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next thrilling story. Drop a comment below and let us know, what was your favorite moment in this story? See you in the next one.